anecdotes today. I'm not sure if it's going to because they changed the way you set it up, which is funky. Oh, I think it automatically starts because it says it's going.
Wow.
Oh.
And we're live.
Yeah. In lieu of a blue go live button, we are live. Hello, Greek Chorus and everyone on YouTube. It is Wednesday, September 21st, 2022, 5 o'clock on the dot. We are punctual as we always are.
Yeah, always in the sense, in the like sixth dictionary sense of the term, meaning almost never. Look, it is the penultimate regularly scheduled episode of In Lieu of Fun. We're going to have a guest, Jordan Ellenberg, but Jordan is going to be about 15 minutes late because he's getting home, and he agreed to do the show, as those of you who watched knows, on Monday, no contingent on being allowed to be late. So he will show up when he shows up. And in the meantime, I want to talk about the New York Times article with the headline, "Lots of food get tossed. These apps let you buy it cheap," which ran the other day, less than 12 hours after I had joked to my wife that we should start a food sharing app, that this was like the logical extension of ride shares, and which is that, and Airbnb, and that when you go to a restaurant and they give you too much food, you should be able to snap a picture of it, and then somebody walking by who's hungry could get your leftovers for a small fraction of the cost of the meal, and we could all use food more efficiently. And I made this joke, and then there's this story that shows up a few minutes later. This is not because my wife was leaking our conversation. It's because people actually made this. So I thought about it, and I decided to tweet about it. And you can find my Twitter thoughts on the subject, where I laid out that this was an inadequate thing because it didn't allow the sharing of restaurant plates with strangers. Now, this is the part I was not expecting. Chefs to start getting in touch with me with a let's talk. Yeah. Yes, people taking this seriously. So I just want to say, everyone, it's a joke. I don't actually want to sell a third of a plate of food, nor would I buy a third of a plate of somebody else's food whom I don't know.
So I want to argue for this, because if you like to sample a lot of different meals, but you're not with a snacker at dinner, how are you going to try everything? This is an easy solution.
But this is so I agree. From an economics point of view, it is efficient. It is the sharing economy taken to its logical conclusion. As I said in the Twitter thread, all over America, restaurant portions are too big and people have extra food on their plates. Yet outside those very restaurants, people are feeling a little bit peckish. We call the app "You Gonna Finish That?" And it's designed to match extra food with the slightly underfed. I agree, as an economics matter, but there are certain downsides to this idea. As the Reverend Hillary Livingston, I presume, says, it will start another pandemic. That's problem number one. Can you think about the raising of jars of Prosecco that the Streptococcus bacterias are raising at the thought of this idea? This is a transmissible germs dream. Number two, let's talk about the gross factor, because there's a lot of gross people out there that you just don't want to share food with.
Very true. But if it was pre-portioned, you had to opt in prior, I'm going to pre-portion my food several ways, so a third, and I eat the first third and then I can take the second third, but I don't eat the third third. And that third third may only be the one that's offered on the app, which I have not touched and has not been contaminated.
Maybe we need a poll. Would you use the app? You going to finish that?
Would you finish that?
But I think we have to like no because it's gross. No, because like we have to give like people options.
Okay. No, because it's gross. No, because I don't share food.
Yeah, I think some people just don't share food. I share food compulsively.
Me too. Yes, but only if pre-portioned.
Yeah.
Or but only if pre-portioned. And then it's pre-portioned hyphenated. I think so.
It's certainly not wrong too.
Okay, and then the next one is I'll finish that.
Yeah.
Okay. Exclamation point. I expect full participation from all viewers today because this is a very serious question. The poll is live. Please answer it. Oh, come on, guys.
We have an early no because it's gross has jumped out to an early lead.
It was the only selection for like the first second the poll was live, and I am so disappointed.
And I think only you have voted for yes, but only if pre-portioned.
I have not voted, so I have not poisoned the data.
I've
tried to bias it. I've tried to bias it, but I haven't voted. Oh man.
Anyway, the number of people on Twitter who seem to be taking this seriously is remarkable. And some of them are very earnest about it. One writes to me, if you were trying to invent a country that had the most abundant natural resources for growing food, it would basically wind up looking like the USA. We are one of the world's major breadbaskets. Hunger in America is entirely about politics and economics and market failures. Another person writes, love this idea. We are such a wasteful society. We should find ways to help folks that don't have enough food to eat. Anyway, another person writes, that's gross and disgusting.
This is the dog shirt of food, the munch dog shirt edition.
I just want to like just share the whole thread here. And it looks like I already did share the thread. There, I shared the thread again. And I just want to appeal to the reasonable Greek chorus member and say, no, am I crazy, or could no reasonable person think I was being serious with this?
But am I reasonable? Because I'm ready to run with it.
All right, all of which is a long way to say that we are not allowed to have fun anymore, except we are allowed to have fun again, because that is why this is the penultimate episode of In Lieu of Fun. But in lieu of fun, we are allowed to have Jordan Ellenberg. And Kornhauser says, I would have thought you were serious. All right, I am abashed. I thought it was really obvious that I wasn't serious.
Ben, you might be entering Scott territory where we're never sure if you're sarcastic or serious.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing but that's a Scott thing, not a me thing. I'm almost never serious. And when I am, I always presage it by saying, okay, look, I'm being serious now.
That's fair.
I mean, I'm always serious when I'm talking about Rick Grinnell, but I mean, other than that.
And we should put a little call to arms. Everyone, if you are comfortable sending foot photos, please tweet them at Rick Grinnell.
Yeah, and actually, use foot gifs if you don't want to send your own feet. Like, I know people are squeamish about that, and also some people have gross feet. Although today, Olivia Troy in honor of Olivia Troy, I asked people to send particularly gnarly foot pics to Rick
I saw
Grinnell
that.
because he was being really nasty to Olivia Troy. In fact, he like sued her and shit. And a lot of people sent a lot of good gnarly feet pictures. I was really proud of y'all. All right, so so we have a few minutes of banter before Jordan shows up. Do you have stuff on your mind, GDF, or should we bring in members of the audience to banter?
If anyone has anything they'd like to talk about, please flag it in the Ask a Question box. My mind is my sweater color called pumpkin spice? No, it is not called pumpkin spice. It is called smashing pumpkins. No, I'm just kidding. But my mind has, I really am so excited about the class. Yesterday was the first lawfare class. Can we talk about that for a second? So I didn't realize it was going to be so technical, and I'm so excited. I'm also embarrassed by how accomplished I was that I was able to get it running like after class, and I figured out that it was going to the wrong directory, and then I was like, I am the champion. I can do anything, and that powered me through the rest of my homework. So it's very good for your self-confidence, everyone.
Excellent. Well, this is what we like to hear. All right, let's deal with David's questions. Questions. Yes. One, did you say you were going to take a train trip to Los Angeles? Yes, and I still am. I'm not sure exactly when it's going to happen, but I have not given up on Operation Amtrak. I do have a earlier, however, my next Amtrak trip, as is known by Eve Gaumont, is that I'm going to go up to Ottawa because I have a date with the Russian embassy in Canada. So that's going to be soon. I'm not sure exactly when, but it's a nice long train ride up from here to Ottawa. You go up through Syracuse and then drive. Anne Kornhauser asks, why not fly? And the answer is because I like taking trains. And also, it's hard to take big ass projectors on airplanes. But if hypothetically one were planning a special military operation in a foreign country, you wouldn't necessarily want to bring a giant projector on a flight.
It doesn't strike me as a BYOP vibe. It's more of a recruit your local projector vibe.
No, I'm
really
gonna bring my own equipment for most special, because you gotta you gotta really know what equipment you're using. And,
that makes sense.
And so it's I don't want to say too much.
No.
SVR clearly watches in lieu of fun. But we're working on it. So that'll be soon. But I do want to go west. So far Operation Amtrak has only taken me as far west as Minneapolis, where of course I went skiing with Joel the Nudge. But I do plan to do another leg of that journey pretty soon. What are the other components of this question? How much should a person pay for news services? This is an unanswerable question because one has to know something about how informed that person wishes to be, and also something about their other budgetary data, like their income level and also, their other commitments financially. But the answer is, should a person subscribe to Lawfare in addition to 4 newspapers and 2 magazines? And the answer to that question is certainly yes, irrespective of the answers to all other financial questions.
If I may, as a disinterested party, because I do not work for Lawfare, I have no association with Lawfare other than taking a class from them, and I currently am a subscriber to Lawfare. The value add is very high, and look at the other news sources. And if you're not getting what you want, or you're getting repetitive news, perhaps substitute one of those sources for Lawfare if your budgetary constraints are too difficult.
Yeah, I will also say on the subject of subscriptions to Lawfare. So first of all, it's not really a subscription; they're donations, and unlike a lot of the other news sources, we are a nonprofit, and we do actually, we're not a publicly traded corporation like the New York Times or the Washington Post. And there's a very direct relationship between your contributions and our ability to pay people and grow. And so I do think it's worth thinking about less in the lines of subscriptions, like newspapers and magazines, and more in the line of charitable contributions to organizations that are doing work that you believe in. And so I would say, don't ask yourself the question, are you doing work, is Lawfare doing work that you believe in, and do you want to support it? Not the question of how many magazines you should subscribe to. Jacob, do not dispense disinformation about Lawfare charitable contributions. I know you're joking, but somebody is going to take you seriously, just like if you suggest a plate sharing app.
I think we need to check in with the poll, because I have faith that some people will be swayed by my very
All right, how's the poll doing?
Oh man. Okay, so we have
an absolute majority for no
54.1% say no because it's gross. 3.3% don't share food. 18% say yes, but only if pre-portioned, the open-minded 18%. And we have the hungry group. I'll finish that for 24.6%. Oh, someone just switched their vote. Guys, I know when you switch, it happens.
Well, so I think we should have a special poll for the 15 people who said, I'll finish that. Why are you unafraid of communicable diseases? Because I think I want to know why this is a very special group of people who would eat off the plates of strangers they met on an app. And I love that. And I love that for them. But I also want to know why they are so unafraid of. And it looks like Jordan Ellenberg is here, on time, as he said. And we're gonna ask him his view of a plate finishing app.
All right, I have invited Jordan, and I'll finish that, folks. Why are you unafraid? And the first answer I'm going to give as an option is going to be willfulness.
All right, so Jordan, here's the question: if there were an app that allowed you, sitting in a restaurant, having ordered a plate of food and being given too much, to put up the leftovers for sale. You take a picture of the half-eaten plate, you put up your location, and then if you're walking by, you can open the app and see what plates are nearby. So if you were, it's a highly efficient sharing economy app that allows food sharing down to the individual ordered plate level. Would you?
First of all, this is called leftover, but with no E, right?
No, it's called "You Gonna Finish That."
Oh, that's even better. Okay, I love it.
So my question is, look at the poll and say, would you use the "You Gonna Finish That" app Options: no, because it's gross. No, because I don't share food. Yes, but only if the sold portion were pre-cut off and sold separately. Or yes, I'll finish that. So where are you on the ultimate food sharing app question?
I think, as always, I have a more complicated answer than one of the ones that's on the list, and I'll use my on the video privileges to express it. I would say no, because sort of some kind of norms I've internalized say that it's gross, even though I don't actually objectively think that it is. So I think sort of some kind of feeling of impropriety would stop me from doing it, despite my actually not thinking there's anything wrong with it. But can I ask a question about this app then? Does the person, either, depending on how you see it, either get to or have to come and sit with you and finish the food, or do they just whisk it away?
Ooh,
I think they.
I would be sort of into the idea of a random person coming and sitting opposite me and polishing off what I was unable to finish.
I would have
and
so
just
many
like,
questions.
Look at the draw, like chat roulette.
Yes.
So
This
I
is
think
so great.
You could probably design it, like there's the social element to it, where it's offered as a sit down or as a boxed up. I think you could, and some restaurants would have rules about that, So so in some, if you're sitting in Tavern on the Green, they might not let the homeless person come in and sit down. So when you're in Tavern on the Green, you have to use the boxed up option.
But they would have to let that person sit down if they wanted to stay on the app. See, that's the genius. It's a way of applying pressure to snobby restaurants.
Ooh.
It's true, although I think the goal here is food efficiency, efficient food distribution, and so I think you want to allow maximum user choice, and part of the users are the restaurants.
I will say, to the question of grossness, I will say I had an experience once where this was probably 30 years ago, I was eating an ice cream cone, and someone I was with, an acquaintance, just darted her head forward and licked my ice cream, like right when it was on the cone that I was holding. And I was so appalled, for reasons that I find hard to rationalize, that even to this day, she's been very successful in life. She has tenure. Like every time I see her name, even if it's for some sort of scholarly work or some achievement, I'm like, she just reached right in there and licked my ice cream cone. Like that's all I can think about. And so obviously on some level, I have a thing about it. Don't you feel like that's a little bit different than eating someone's leftovers? That's more invasive somehow?
No consent. There was no consent.
Yeah. Right. Now, if you had an app where you had put up
yes.
that's the lick my ice cream cone. I'm holding it up here like the Statue of Liberty. You can come lick my ice cream cone for price $4 or even bid on licking my ice cream cone. You would feel totally differently.
It already exists, man.
It's becoming an OnlyFans subsection. It's like licking people's ice creams, strangers. So I have I'll finish that folks, why are you unafraid poll, but I think my answers are redundant. So I'd like your help, gentlemen, to adjust them. So I have 4 proposed answers. One is willfulness.
So this is, Jordan, this is a poll for the people who said that they would actually use this app.
Oh, I see. Okay.
And we're asking them why they're unafraid. So I have, the first answer is willfulness. The second answer is spite, which may be redundant. Then I have a superhuman immune system. And then the fourth is I have a death wish.
What about I'm hungry?
That's fair. That's fair. All right. Answer 5. I'm hungry. Occam's razor. Okay. Should we change willfulness or spite?
I think willfulness and spite are too similar. I would change spite to machismo.
Oh yeah, that.
Oh.
I feel that then. Because I want to know, if I were a yes, it would be a machismo thing.
It would be just to show that you would do it.
Yes, I think you should make it not just for the yes people, because there weren't that many. I think it's if there's any particle of you that considered saying yes, why?
Okay.
Then more people can answer.
I'll finish that, folks, and those inclined to answer. Why are you unafraid?
So I think actually there is enormous comic potential in general in taking the sharing economy to its logical conclusion. We have diaper services. That's an early sharing economy thing from before there were apps. But we don't have, we have clothes sharing services like Rent the Runway. But, you could go pretty far with, adult underwear sharing services, for example.
But then you don't, unlike your proposed app, you don't share the diaper once it's already been partially used.
Oh my goodness.
There's still a little bit of absorbency left in this thing, I'm pretty sure.
It's not quite saturated. Oh.
Yes.
So, Jordan Ellenberg, you are starting a new semester. What are you teaching this year?
I am teaching real analysis, which I love, which is like not my field at all. I taught it during the pandemic as an emergency sub for someone who abruptly resigned, as many people did in the Great Resignation. And I discovered that I thought I was doing the department a big favor by jumping in to teach this class outside my area of expertise, but it was super fun. And now I'm teaching 2 sections of it because I like it so much.
I have to ask,
All right.
what is it? And then what are you analyzing?
Is real analysis in contrast to fake analysis, or
fake news?
or is it in contrast to irrational analysis?
It's in contrast to complex analysis, which is about like imaginary numbers and the like, but it's also in contrast with calculus, of which it is sort of the souped up version. So what I like about it is the course starts kind of by reenacting this kind of existential crisis that mathematicians faced in the early 19th century, and they realized we didn't really know what functions were, and then when we thought about it, we were like, wait, we don't even really know what numbers are. Is there any ground to stand on? Is anything defined? Does any of this actually make sense? And it was sort of like a huge crisis in the foundations that was resolved in a very satisfactory manner. And we get to tell that story and be like, wait, what actually is a number? Like, what does that mean? And that's what we sort of spend the first 3 weeks of the course doing. So it's pretty fun. And then we talk about like functions and the meaning of a limit and continuity and like all these things. We really like nail it down, and it's quite satisfying.
Okay, so I want to push on this because this is a subject I've never. What is the crisis that affected the community in the early 19th century? Like, for those of us who never got this far in math, what's the nature of the problem that this posed an answer to?
Well, you've got 3 weeks. No, we'll do it fast. So part of the problem was this: Newton and Leibniz calculus. Calculus works really well. It does lots of physics. But by modern standards, or even by 19th century standards, Newton didn't prove anything. Like, it was all very floppy. It was all kind of vibes, I got to admit.
I've never heard Newton accused of being vibes. I'm enjoying this already.
Newton was 100% vibes, in a good way. Vibes are extremely important in mathematics. But even at the time, there were these very skeptical people. He talks about these calculus and like infinitesimal quantities. Oh, you move this like infinitesimally over, and then you move this infinitesimally up, and then you divide one. And there was this sort of famous anti-Newton writer who was like, what are these things, these infinitesimals? Are they the ghosts of departed quantities? A very famous burn on Newton. And the burn was completely correct. He didn't have a very clear idea of what these things actually were, just that they worked. And now you may say, you guys are practical people. Who cares if he proved anything? Well, what happened was that as we took Newton's calculus and tried to expand it because nowadays, we do calculus in infinite dimensional space. If you do physics, you have to do that. Like, we do all kinds of crazy stuff. And things started to break down because nothing was proved. So things that worked pretty well in one dimension, maybe the notions of limit, notions of continuity, they didn't work too well in these kind of vastly expanded contexts in which we were trying to do the mathematics. And so it was sort of painful, but we're like, we got to go back to the beginning and understand like what these things actually are. And that's sort of what we spent the 19th century doing. And I got to talk about it. But look, I'll give you an example. Even this question, because this comes up for like people all the time. even this question of like what a number is, you might say, oh, well, a number, it's like a decimal expansion. But then you have the kind of fearsome is 0.99999 repeating infinitely many times the same number as 1. If you think a number just is a decimal expansion, then I guess they're different because they're definitely two different decimal expansions. But you have real problems if you think of those two things as different numbers.
Especially when you go into practical applications.
The other option.
Sorry.
Say again?
Oh, I said you'll especially have problems if you go into like practical applications where you have to like account for that within some kind of weight distribution. Sorry. But
yeah, and like, well, look, if in practical applications, you probably really don't want to think a number is an infinite decimal string because you're not going to actually be able to work with an infinite decimal string in your machine, right? The other kind of classical, there's kind of two competing views.
Before you go to the other alternative explanation, I'm hung up on this one because it seems to me that a number is there even a stable definition? I mean, there are cultures in which there aren't more than 4 or 5. You go in certain societies, the counting system is 1, 2, 3, 4, many, right? Can you define a number in the abstract rather than with reference to the role that the function that it's playing?
So that is a great question. And I'm going to be honest with you. There's in our class, when I say what is a number, I mean, like, what do we mean by like a real number, like a quantity? I take for granted, I'm like, let's presume we know what 6 means, like the counting numbers. So there's another course that interrogates that. That one I've never taught that addresses the questions that you're asking, Ben. But for my class, I'm like, we'll go insane if we don't start out by saying we all agree on what 6 is. So let's posit that, and then from there try to understand like what the square root of 2 means.
That's really interesting because it seems to me that the numbering systems have developed in response to the inadequacies of previous numbering systems. And so, there were pre-counting number systems, but then like they didn't account for the number 6 because they've got many after 4 or 5. So then you had to create a sort of decimal, a decimal system that was infinite. But then you needed to figure out how to account for fractions, and then you needed to figure out how to account for irrational numbers, and then you get into this what the fuck is the square root of -1 thing. Or even the negative numbers, right? And so it seems to me each of these questions arises because of some degree of the deficiency in the way we were thinking about numbers before. Is that, and that they're not that they're not intrinsic. There's no such thing intrinsically as a number. There's only such thing as the systems we create in order to do certain types of operations.
Well, you were doing fine until the last sentence when you really kind of stepped into the hot lava of controversy. All the historical account was right. And you're absolutely right that math, the history of math is like a lot like therapy, right? It's a lot like, okay, we have to like face our inadequacies instead of looking away from them. We have to like look right at them and like deal with them instead of continuing to skate by as we have been, right? That's the entire history of math right there. Although I'll say it even goes, here's a really interesting case that like for the Greeks, a number was a length, right? The length of a line segment. They had a very geometric view of what everything was. And that might seem really good, but that's kind of inadequate too, because here's where they got stuck. They were like, well, what does it mean when we multiply 2 numbers? Oh, that's the area of a rectangle, right? I do this. And I guess 3 numbers, the product of 3 numbers means like the volume of some what we would call a rectangular parallelepiped, or a box in the common parlance. But then they were like, multiply 4 numbers. I don't know. Can you do that? That seems like maybe something that's not allowed. right? Which is very weird for us, but for them, because their notion of what multiplication meant was, combining lengths into a figure in this way, they're like, well, since there's no fourth dimension, probably multiplying 4 numbers is not something that numbers can do. And that was a deficiency, right, in their setup of what they thought a number meant. Now we do that willy-nilly. But yeah, on the whole, you're right. And actually, it's one of my pet peeves about math teaching, that I think we don't respect how hard fractions are. Fractions are really hard. We do this to these children. I mean, any normal child, they're like, what's a number? They're like, oh, it's like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Like, a number is the answer to a question that starts how many. And all of a sudden, this like innocent 10-year-old, you're like, okay, now there's like 3/5, and that's a number. And any normal person's response is like, what? That's not a number. That is simply not the same kind of thing. You can't say like, oh, how many apples do you have? 3/5. Like, no, right? That's sort of a how much. It's just a fundamentally different kind of question. And yet we just toss it in there and like, oh yeah, this is a number. You can add 3/5 to 3/4. Like, why? Why can you do that? It's like if I told you can add a cow to a frog. I mean, of course, indeed you can, but we should respect that it's this massive conceptual leap that we're asking them to make, and we're going to like hold their hand as they make it.
No, and I think that's even truer, although not with 10-year-olds, of irrational numbers. That there's, when you start asking somebody to treat a number that cannot be expressed as a conceptually real thing, that is a very hard idea.
When we teach the Pythagorean theorem and we say the hypotenuse of this triangle, its length is the square root of 2. If a student says to you in that moment, but 2 doesn't have a square root, that is a deeply respectable answer. Like, you should respect that. I mean, yes, you have to get past it, but that's a sign that the student is actually successfully engaging with the material, and that student is saying the exact same thing that the Pythagoreans would have said.
So what's the right pedagogical approach to that? I mean, I know you don't teach kids that age, but if you were going to take children's intellect seriously and teach them about adding 3/5 to 6/8, which is, by the way, they have to understand the same as 3/4. You can teach them mechanically how to do that reduction, but what's the right way to teach them about that conceptually?
So, I always say about teaching, and you're absolutely right, I don't have any experience teaching 10-year-olds. So what I know about teaching comes from teaching college students, but I think at least this part of it carries over, that there's no single right way. There's a lot of wrong ways, many of which are very popular, but different kids are different, and I think there's like a lot of approaches which are going to work for some kids. I mean, in this case, actually, somebody sort of said something like it in the chat. I think thinking of 3/5 as a proportion, like if you sort of have 500 people, 3/5 of them is a certain number of people, in this case 300. And I think thinking about adding proportions is a thing that you could do. In fact, and by the way, I'm not inventing anything new here. I mean, this is what, if you actually look, I mean, it's been a while since your kids were this young, Ben, but I mean, the way textbooks look, it's often in terms of pizza, very relatable for many kids, right? Very, very often it's in terms of like, I ate a half of the pizza and somebody else ate a third of the pizza, like how much pizza's left. But I just want to emphasize that is, I think, correctly, when the concept is introduced, not treating 1/2 as a number.
Right. It's
like 1/2 of the pizza. It's a proportion. And I think what that's good is that then at least it makes sense why you can add them, right? That they have properties that numbers have, even though it seems to be a different kind of thing. And then you start to relax about it and start to be like, we call this like the quacks like a duck principle. If it quacks like a duck and talks like a duck, like it's duck. So, if it adds like a number and it multiplies by a number, we might as well just call it a number. And that's kind of a common thing we do. But you sort of ease into it by treating it as what it is, a proportion.
GDF?
No,
Do you have questions, or should we go to the audience?
I think we should go to the audience, but I'm also just like now pondering about how there has to be this preconception and like a tacit agreement upon a whole with proportions, which I find to be fascinating. And I'm also struck by the fact that math and cryptozoology deal with imaginary and somewhat irrational things very seriously, and it makes me absolutely delighted. So let us go to the audience question.
We talk about the menagerie of numbers all the time. The menagerie. Wait, before we go to the audience, Ben, can I make a confession?
Of course.
Always.
Can we start with the confession?
Do you want absolution for it?
So I've been on this show probably, I don't know how many times, maybe 4 or 5 times, like several times. And there is something that I've never confessed to you, and now I'm going to do it, which is that I had fun. Every time. I know it was not allowed, and I didn't want to tell you, but each time I did have fun. I'm sorry, but now I felt like I had to say that before we signed off with the penultimate.
First of all, I have to scold you for dealing with us on false pretenses. You know, we open every show by saying we're not allowed to have fun anymore. You're here in lieu of fun. And I think it's very wrong of you, like Ron DeSantis level deception.
Yes, and I felt bad. Like when I tricked you into believing that Ivan Boesky had tricked teenage me into helping him use math to money launder. When I actually made you believe that, that was very fun for me. I wasn't supposed to be having fun, but I was.
So yeah, I mean, but here is the absolution part as your you know, Jewish priest. First of all, I think this sin is venial, and I also think it is very common. And so
the money laundering or the deception, Ben?
No, the deception. Like I think everybody who has come on in lieu of fun multiple times, yes, probably could make a similar confession. And maybe the hosts here are guilty, and the Greek chorus members are also guilty of similar infractions against God and man. So, you know, absolved.
That's a load off my chest.
Richard Wattenbarger.
Hello, Richard. I have fixed your mic.
Oh, yay. So 41 years ago, this fall, I took real analysis, and it was I was a senior that year, and I was in math, and it was actually the class that made me realize that grad studies in math were going to be way too stressful for me. And I still wonder how much of it was the material, which I do know is difficult, and how much of it is the teaching. And so I'm wondering what makes a good real analysis teacher?
Well, it's only the second time I've ever done it. So I don't know. I will admit there's something about this. I make a good sales pitch for it here in our kind of non-technical time together. But there's definitely, in fact, this just happened in class that I like proved something, and then I was like, that was dry. I have to admit, that was a little dry. I went into it with some momentum, but then I finished it.
And did you acknowledge that to the class?
Came out kind of dry. So,
with the candor that you acknowledge.
Not like I didn't know. Come on.
With the candor that you acknowledge.
Either they're going to think it was dry and I'm pretending it wasn't, or you acknowledge. I think there is a certain aspect to this subject, and also, and you know, in many ways to all kinds of math, where I call it the Lego part, where like you're kind of putting Legos together, and to me, the mere fact of like snapping them together and they all fit perfectly and they form a structure, I find that very satisfying. But that's a little bit idiosyncratic, and I cannot ask everybody to find it satisfying. Like, in other words, sometimes there's like a big idea, and sometimes it's just the feeling of the Lego. I think another comparison, you know, there's some people, so I do like Lego, but there's some people who love popping bubble wrap, and they go down, they finish one row, pop, 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 then they do the next row, and they find that very satisfying. Like, that's not me. My daughter's like that. Same kind of like orderly satisfaction of like everything fitting together incredibly nicely. And that particular aspect which is maybe a little less conceptual and more primal, I can't always ask the students to go there with me. I'm like, if you dig this, great. If you don't, I'm gonna be talking about something else in a second. I don't know, do you remember who you took it from? Like, where'd you take it and who'd you take it from? Do you remember?
Oh, Richard. I'll bring Richard back.
I'll
bring him back.
I don't want you to throw like a long deceased math professor under the bus. I mean, I kind of do, but I don't necessarily.
I don't want to be responsible for it, but I love it. Richard.
He says he was at Tennessee Tech.
One thing is that in Wisconsin. Oh, okay. Do you remember?
His name was Tyson Swong. He was from Korea. He died a few years ago at age 94. He was, and he was probably the smartest guy in the department too. So,
but you went from there to become a musicologist. Was it like fear of real analysis that you were like, it's all Bruckner after this?
Well, no, I went on and did grad studies in engineering. I worked as an engineer, and then
I didn't know that.
I realized, I got a master's in engineering, worked as an engineer for 4 years, and it was not for me. And,
what kind of engineering?
Mechanical engineering.
Okay.
Structural engineering. So I was kind of on the more mathematical side of it. And then I went and studied music, but math was too stressful. Engineering was too practical. So I had to do something of no use.
Yeah, I like that you were like, I was gonna like build a bridge that like thousands of people were gonna drive over every day, but math was too high stakes and stressful for me.
Well, actually, my first job where I worked for 2 years was structural analysis of nuclear power plant. So
very low stress.
Very chill. Low stakes.
So
chill.
Yeah.
If it works, it works. If it doesn't, whatever.
So if you're ever in upstate New York and they have an accident there, think of me.
Oh, Richard. Well,
I will say I got a salty email just this morning from one of my students who's like, "Why do they force us? I want to do financial math. Why do they force us to take this course for financial math?" And I am a little bit like, I don't know, to keep you out of trouble. maybe sort of think
you should tell this student the Ivan Boesky story. You know,
I should. You think you'd believe it? Maybe.
I think a question like that warrants an outright lie in response.
That also is like a pretty aggressive email to get from like a current student, like this early in the semester. They're really either struggling or call for help.
I think I create a classroom persona that indicates that I can take it.
Okay,
so.
good.
No, but I mean, to be honest, there is an answer to this question, which I gave him, which is that like somebody who's trading at a desk almost certainly does not need to know real analysis, but like, presumably going to a graduate program in financial math means that at least in principle, you might be one of the people who builds the tools that the trader at the desk is using. And then that person, like, they really do need to understand some of the principles we're going to do in this class, the person building the tools.
So what is
financial math?
Financial
Mathematicians out there in the chat, please do weigh in. Well, they're people who are building models that
is it modeling?
Sort of slightly bullshitting here because I don't have part of it is modeling, so it's like some kind of unholy cocktail of probability and analysis and stochastic processes, and which means like random walks, like what the stock market is.
Yeah, that's interesting. I've never figured out how much of modeling is reverse engineering the past.
Well, the past is all we know anything about, right? So what else is there to engineer?
Well, I mean, you're trying to engineer the future, but you're doing it by building a model that will predict the past. But you have the benefit of knowing the past already, which is what enables you to check it, but it also enables you to tune to it. And so I've never quite understood what about the ability to predict the past should give you confidence that the model will accurately predict the future.
Well, let me put it this way. I think the more you understand the underlying dynamics, the better it's going to work. I mean, the example would be like if a tennis ball is flying at your face, you actually like can sort of reasonably model it's going to like keep on flying towards you until it hits you in the face, and it's not going to suddenly veer off. But that's because you sort of know something about how physics works. But you might say like, well, why do you know something about how physics works? Because you've seen the past and sort of seen that projectiles in motion sort of tended not to suddenly veer off. But of course, there we sort of have a very well-established, robust principle of how projectiles move. And I think, to say the least, the movement of financial markets, our understanding of the underlying dynamics is not as good as our understanding of basic
a lot more variables.
Newtonian physics.
We need more Newton vibes.
So how do you assess?
Yes, well, no, I mean, it is a very vibes-based subject. But I'll give you an example. Okay, here's an example of something I do in my class, which I think is like very directly relevant. Like if you have some algorithm and like you have some, let's say you have some model. Okay, it's going to work well some of the time and badly some of the time. That's true of basically any model you might have. And there's stuff we talk about endlessly in real analysis of like what are called LP norms, L1 norms, L infinity norms, blah, blah, blah. It doesn't even matter what that is. What matters is that it's a formalization of the idea. When you say, is this model good or bad? There's totally different things you might mean. One person might say, I want its average performance to be as good as possible. And a different person might say, actually, I want the worst case scenario to be the least bad. I'm willing to tolerate a sort of worst performance on average as long as the worst it can get. Like the nuclear power plant designer might have that kind of attitude. So that's what you would call an L1 attitude in the first case versus an L infinity attitude in the second case. And there's this whole very beautiful, rich mathematical theory that formalizes all the in-betweens you can have between caring about just what happens on average versus trying to minimize your risk in the worst case. And it's a very, very nice mathematical language in which we can sort of talk about that range of values that we might have.
Okay,
Right?
so then let's talk about then perhaps the most famous model in the world right now, and certainly the one that will be closest to the front of the minds of the most members of the Greek chorus right now, which is the 538 election forecasting model, which over the last several months has gone from it is basically an even probability that the Democrats will control the Senate as the Republicans will control the Senate, and an 85% chance that the Republicans will control the House, to now a greater chance that the Democrats will control the Senate than that the Republicans will control the House, right? Both around 72% probabilities or something. And we've had a very rich debate on this show over the years about the integrity and value of this type of model, both from people who have built election forecasting models to pollsters and political analysts. And I guess I'm interested in your sense of it as a mathematician. Is this a good way or a bad way, in your view, to think about electoral politics?
So, okay, I'm just going to plant a flag and say a good way. It would be bad if it were the only way we thought about electoral politics, but I think that would be true for any way. I mean, I think we're certainly in a better place than we were when it was 100% vibe. And people were just like, I don't know, I've just like got a feeling about that Dukakis guy, right? I mean, when that was all we had, that was inferior to the sort of epistemological situation we have now, where we're at least making some effort to think about these things qualitatively. But yes, but that doesn't mean, I think what would be bad is if you were like, what is politics? It's a needle. It's that needle that's like going like this and that, because politics obviously is more than that. I mean, even just look at the fact that what you do with the needle and what you do with aggregating polls doesn't see the kind of jostling over what the basic rules are about how the votes are going to be counted and aggregated, right? I mean, or it sees it in sort of some sort of slow, indirect way. And that's part of electoral politics too.
So when you think about,
I don't know, is that okay? Is that
no,
is that the answer? What were you expecting me to say?
Well, I didn't know, which was why I asked the question. I mean, I have my own answer to the question, which is methodologically different from yours, but comes out in a very similar place, which is, I think for a lot of people who are not versed in modeling, people have a lot of trouble with the difference between a probabilistic estimate and a prediction. And that the statement, there's a 70% chance that the Democrats are going to control the Senate, actually translates in a lot of people's mind to Nate Silver is predicting that the Democrats are going to control the Senate, which is a subtly very different proposition. I also think it has a way, but that said, I do think it's useful on its own terms. And if you were spending money, and he comes out of the gambling world and the sports betting world, and if you were spending money betting on races, it would be a very good model with which to use as your basis for spending your money in bets. The question that I have, and the reason is that the right way for us to be thinking about politics, given all the other components of it in question? For example, just to talk about Wisconsin, where you are right now, Ron Johnson is a genuinely bad human being who very much deserves to be removed from the Senate. Now, there's no really bad human being. Oh yeah, no, I've unfortunately had my occasions. There's no variable for that. They don't code for the really bad human being variable. That should maybe make one care about Wisconsin Senate race more than one cares about, say, I don't know. I don't know that I think Marco Rubio is a chicken shit, but I'm not sure that he's a genuinely terrible human being. So I would actually, as a matter of preference, prefer that but modeling doesn't account for that kind of preference, and it shouldn't, because that's highly normative stuff. So I guess I think it sort of weirdly leaves a lot of important things out. And you're right, it doesn't, one of them is the mechanical vote counting stuff, which can have a huge amount to do with the way elections come out. But another is just how strongly people feel about certain candidates, and more importantly, how strongly they should feel about certain candidates just isn't a factor at all.
Right. Well, pollsters do ask, how likely are you to vote? Blah, blah, blah. They try to, in some sense, to gauge, how much are you 100% going to show up and vote for this candidate, as opposed to vaguely preparing them because you asked. But you're right. But let me, in defense, I'm just going to be sort of captain and save Nate Silver and say, he does exactly what he says on the box, right? He would never say he's telling you what you should care about more or less. Right. But you're absolutely right, Ben, that people read more into it. And this issue of people saying, if people are going to have this response of look at all those times he said this thing had only a 30% chance of happening, and then it happened. Well, that should happen a lot.
Right. It should happen literally 30% of the time.
Problem is that's my problem, because I'm the math teacher, right? That's the job of America's math teachers, to be and in some sense, I actually feel like Nate Silver is kind of a math teacher, and that the ideal from a math pedagogical perspective, not necessarily from a political perspective, is that people all across America will be wait a minute, Like I saw him, there was like 10 things he was said was gonna happen 30% with probability, and like 3 of them happened. And then they're like, wait a minute. I'm like, that's not bad. That's good. But I mean, that would be great. I mean, so ideally, once Nate Silver and the sort of mini Silvers have been around for long enough, I guess my hope is that will sort of participate in the great current of math education, that they'll be like, oh yeah, like when you say something has a 25% chance of happening, I've noticed, because I've seen a lot of predictions like that, which we didn't grow up seeing. Oh, I've noticed that about a quarter of those things happen. Like, I guess that's what that means. Although I feel like, honestly, we're not there with it raining yet. So, after 50 years of the weather report, people are still like, 25% chance of rain, you fucking liar.
Yeah.
People still do that. So,
well, we are going to leave it there. Jordan Ellenberg.
Perfect.
You're
Okay.
a great American. You're a terrible weather forecaster. And your wrestling skills, even this many years later, are, I think, still probably pretty subpar. This is the penultimate episode, and for those who are still having trouble with the counting and numbers thing, that means that this is the second to last episode, and 2 is a number. We will be back on Friday for the final regularly scheduled episode of In Lieu of Fun. It will be cheese night, and if you miss it, you will never again have an opportunity to come to cheese night. So bring your cheese. It'll be 46 hours and 59 minutes from now. And until then, Genevieve Della Fera.
We don't have fun anymore, but in lieu of fun, we have confessions of secret fun. All right. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Jordan.